Hi guys, and welcome to another video on my art channel Sophie Art. So recently I watched another episode of Doctor Who. I really like Doctor Who, and I watched the episode Heaven Sent. And in that episode the Doctor talks about how many seconds eternity has. And as I figured out, that is from an old fairy tale from the Grimm's Household Tales. And in my country we call them Die Gebrüder Grimm. And I really like the Grimm's Household Tales in general, and I read a lot about them in my childhood, and I thought I don't know this specific one, so I might also make a video about it. This fairy tale is actually a little shorter than I expected, so we will talk a little bit about the artwork and the story after I'm done with the fairy tale, because otherwise the video would be very short and I probably wouldn't be done making the artwork. But let's start. The Shepherd Boy. There was once on a time a shepherd boy whose fame spread far and wide because of the wise answers he gave to every question. The king of the country heard of it likewise, but did not believe it, and sent for the boy. Then he said to him, "If thou canst give me an answer to 3 questions which I will ask thee, I will look on thee as my own child, and thou shalt dwell with me in my royal palace." The boy said, "What are the 3 questions?" The king said, "The first is, how many drops of water are there in the ocean?" The shepherd boy answered, "Lord King, if you will have all the rivers on earth dammed up so that not a single drop runs from them into the sea until I have counted it, I will tell you how many drops there are in the sea." The king said, "The next question is, how many stars are there in the sky?" The shepherd boy said, "Give me a great sheet of white paper." And then he made so many fine points on it with a pen that they could scarcely be seen, and it was all but impossible to count them. Anyone who looked at them would have lost his sight. Then he said, "There are as many stars in the sky as there are points on the paper. Just count them." But no one was able to do it. The king said, "The third question is, how many seconds of time are there in eternity?" Then said the shepherd boy, "In Lower Pomeria is the Diamond Mountain, which is 2.5 miles high, 2.5 miles wide, and 2.5 miles in depth. Every 100 years a little bird comes and sharpens its beak on it. And when the whole mountain is worn away by this, then the first second of eternity will be over." The king said, "Thou hast answered the 3 questions like a wise man, and shalt henceforth dwell with me in my royal place, and I will regard thee as my own child." So that's the end of the story. I was really curious about it after I first heard it in Doctor Who, and I must say I was a little bit confused about how short it was, because as someone who writes stories themselves, you could have made a little more with it, in my opinion. But on the other hand, how are these stories told? Like, they start off with someone telling the story, and then those who heard the story will move on and also tell it. And after like thousands of people who told the story, that's what the Grimm's Household Tales consists of, and the 2 brothers wrote down. So obviously it got shorter and changed a lot in that time period. But I would be really curious to see if there is some more to this, if there are some more things written about the story. And I will definitely look out for a whole storybook with English translations in it that I can tell you. But at the moment all I have is this little story, and I must say it reminds me of another story. I just don't exactly know where it comes from, but there also was something with stars and ink on a paper. I'm just not sure. I think in this story someone was encaged and he was only able to get out if you could tell how many stars there are in the sky. And I'm really not sure where I heard of this story, but it would be interesting to know if maybe those 2 are connected in some way. Or also interesting to know what story I'm thinking about, but I really don't know now. Since this story was so short, I think we can talk a little bit about it. The last sentence, the thing about the mountain chopped off every 100 years for a little bit, combined with the story of Doctor Who, just is really cool to me. The meaning that it has just really gets me, because when you think of eternity, that's just something that's hard for a human being to understand. It's not really something we or anything in nature is made for. So that even hundreds of years ago, people thought about it and created this kind of story around it is really interesting to me. And all of these three questions are kind of hard to get as a human being. And I think it's interesting that now we are much further in answering the first two questions, which is maybe why the answers that the shepherd boy gives, which is kind of the very, very intelligent little boy, those answers seem a bit strange, at least to me. I'm not sure what he meant with draining the rivers. Maybe it should show that that is impossible to count, because it is impossible to drain all of them. But it just seems kind of weird for me. In case that isn't the meaning of this sentence, it just seems a bit strange that he demands the king to do that. But maybe that's just my opinion. And the second one could probably also have the same meaning, with it being impossible to do that. And because no one accepts the answer that is impossible to answer, he just gave them an answer that was impossible to solve. Which is in some way interesting, but I think it's really interesting that now we have kind of a better answer to this. It's not that we have the final answer, like there are 100,000 drops, which would be way too less. But anyway, but we could calculate it far better now, and I'm sure that we are much further also with the star question, because I read that there are more grains of sand on the ocean than stars in the sky, which therefore must mean that we have an answer to how many stars there are in the sky. And I'm sure you could figure that out by asking some or watching a YouTube video about NASA people talking about something. I did that once or twice. Sometimes that interests me. I also watched videos about a random force pulling all the galaxies in the universe into a specific direction, which they don't have an answer for why exactly, but it was really interesting to watch. So yeah, sometimes I do this. It's quite entertaining, okay? And when you draw, it's kind of very relaxing to listen to that. But coming to the last sentence, this one will probably always be something we can answer. And I think the answer that the wise boy gave is just really interesting to me. And when you know the story of Doctor Who, where he punches through the adamantium, I'm not sure if I spelled that correctly, but now the sentence has a lot of emotion that comes with it. And I think it's a really interesting way to explain it. And one very important thing, I'm sorry if while I was telling the story I sounded a little strange. It was just that the English version was kind of using Germanized English with the do and the, and I know what the words mean in German or what they are supposed to be and how they got there, but I really don't know how they spelled them. And that was really, really confusing for me. And I listened to a translation of them on the internet, and yet still I'm not 100% sure if I got them right. So I'm sorry, I hope you can figure out what I meant. It's really, really strange for me to have the kind of German word du and the English word you to do. And that is kind of a mixture of German dialect and English, and that was really interesting and funny to hear and see. I did really not know that that was a thing, and I really don't know if it is a thing anymore. Maybe it was something that was popular hundreds of years ago. But yeah, I'm sorry if that was strange to you. I tried my best. Yeah, that's the end of my little storytelling for this week and my kind of philosophize with Sophie part. I hope that was interesting for you. It was quite interesting for me to talk a little bit about that because I tend to philosophize a lot. And yeah, I hope you had fun and we will see each other next week. Bye!